Hello, everyone. This is going to be a groundbreaking podcast because we're going to figure out the solution, the total solution to illegal drugs and how we can clean up society, right?
I hope so. That would be great.
I know. But that's what we're going to talk about. Law enforcement dealing with drug addiction, which is a super, super critical topic right now. Welcome to another edition of Odyssey House Journals. I'm Randall Carlisle. My co-host is Nicole Slack. And our guest today is a man I've known for, 20-some years
30.
or 30-some years? Yes. Okay. Because he's arrested me a whole bunch of times, but he was very gentle with me when he did. Chris Bertram is, what do you have? I was trying to, 25 years of law enforcement or?
25 years in law enforcement. Now I've been retired almost 9 years.
And you were the police chief in Holiday.
Yes.
And his dad, for you old timers there, Lou Bertram, who I knew very well, who dealt with the media, was FBI director for the region, right?
He was here in Salt Lake and
Right.
retired in 1988. Yes, and then made it when he retired. He was more than willing to talk to the media.
Yes,
which was unlike most FBI agents.
That's very true. I know. He was probably the most liberal person who would talk about federal activities like that. So.
Yes.
So anyway, one of the reasons I wanted to have you here is because you're not afraid to speak about how you feel about certain topics. And this whole drug issue, which obviously we care about at Odyssey House, has just become such a horrible scourge around the country because we have so many overdose deaths and everything. And so I guess the question is, because drugs are so powerful now with like fentanyl and xylazine and all the crap that people are using, is there a solution to this?
Well, I'll tell you the solution is I went through my career, my dad went through his. The one thing that we figured out is we're not going to wrest our way out of this problem. Law enforcement, when I first started in 1990, we were arresting everybody for everything.
Right.
And there was mandates.
Small amounts of pot even.
Absolutely. Yep. That was, to find, a few, marijuana cigarettes, somebody was going to jail. Find more than a few, then they were going to jail for distribution. But as my career evolved and we got into, the 2000s and 2010s and other drugs, I went through the meth of the 90s and the meth labs of the 90s, and we evolved into the opiate problem of the mid-2000s. And now we're into the fentanyl problem, which I've retired, but I see it because I work on the criminal defense side of things now, and I see the people that are, involved in fentanyl and the other drugs, the opiate drugs. But the one thing I will say, especially for the end user, the person that,
which are the people that we deal with.
They're the people that you do. We are not going to wrest our way out of the problem. And I've experienced this many times from the law enforcement side, from a criminal defense side, from a family side. That treatment is where we should be putting our resources. It doesn't mean that people aren't going to get arrested. But if you believe that that arrests, simply putting the person in jail is going to solve this problem, it is not going to solve the problem. They're going to come out of jail.
Nancy Reagan said, "Just say no."
Yes.
As a solution to the problem. That's not working very well.
It doesn't work, and I think that one thing that I will say that over my career, education is probably the bigger issue. And when I say that education is part of that treatment option, that we give people the life skills to be able to go out and survive in society. Change their lives around so that they can, occupy jobs and make good decisions and hopefully stay away from, the problems that they've had in the past with regards to drugs. And I understand that they're not going to be perfect. They're going to probably slip and fall a few times, more than a few times maybe. But we've got to continue to stay with them because I think from a law enforcement standpoint, if we're not giving them the treatment, we're not putting that as part of the solution, we're going to continue to deal with them in the criminal justice system. And it's not just the fact that they're possessing drugs or dealing drugs, it is the other crimes that sometimes go along with trying to support that habit.
Which are a ton of peripheral crimes.
It is. It really is.
We had our last podcast. We had a guy who's been in prison on and off for 18 years?
20.
20? Okay. and he finally made the decision to get into treatment, but his outlook on it was, and it's sort of what you're saying, is you should offer an option of treatment to people when they're arrested. But his outlook for most of his life was, I'll just do my time because treatment's too hard. How do you get around something like that?
That's a tough one, Randall, because as I've dealt with people that have been in treatment, been successful, been unsuccessful, the one thing it comes down to is when they want to make that decision. When the Rio Grande project was going on, where they were arresting everybody, and the sheriff and the city police chief had come up with this idea that we're gonna do this big investigation, and we're gonna offer those individuals, when they are arrested, you go to treatment or you go to jail. And I was retired by then, but I was talking to people in the narcotics investigations unit, and they said that they believed that most of the people would take treatment. And I said, absolutely not. Prior to the arrest, I told them, most of those people will just go to jail because they can do their time, they can get back out and go back to those habits that felt comfortable, that they didn't have to do change. And surprisingly, that was it. Majority of the people picked jail. Those that did pick treatment, the majority of those ended up, leaving treatment within a short time, and they had to go to jail anyway. And so, that idea that we'll offer a rationally thinking person that's not the case. Where I think that sometimes law enforcement fail is they think that everybody thinks like they do. And that if they were given the choice of jail or treatment, they would, of course, take treatment.
Sure.
But those aren't who we're dealing with. These people are at points in their lives, whether through their environment, through their biology, through their learning, they're at a point where they're not always going to make those decisions, those rational decisions. However, I think that within the criminal justice system, we have to offer all those options. Because when that moment comes that they decide, this is it, and I'm gonna try, I would hope as society that we're there to provide them with that opportunity.
Nicole and I are both recovering alcoholics, and we were talking about how irrational your mind is at the time. You were talking about, elaborate on how you thought you were being a good mom.
Oh, yeah, I thought I was handling it. I thought I was balancing because I wasn't drinking to go to my daughter's lacrosse games, and I'd make sure I got everything I needed to get done, and then I would go home and put my son to bed and binge drink until whenever. And I was like, I'm managing this.
And most of the people in our program admit that their minds change drastically when they achieve a certain degree of sobriety. And it's like, God, I didn't think, I thought the only person I was hurting was myself, and I'm not hurting anyone else. And so, but at the point law enforcement gets involved with somebody like that, they're not thinking rationally.
They're not. No, they're not. And it's interesting, Randall, because you bring up the peripheries of the drug abuse, those other things that go into the criminal justice system that bring you in contact with law enforcement. And they're not thinking about that. And I don't think they have a great feel. And even when they get introduced into the criminal justice system through those, again, they're not always thinking that, this is, the jail or treatment are good options. They're just trying to get away from it and get back to what they know. What they know, and change is tough. But I also think that it's interesting, especially from the criminal defense side, I run into people that become, hire an attorney, and you start to, realize that they are looking for a way out. And it's what makes me feel good is when we have a client that you see 6 months, 12 months, 24 months later, and they're still sober, and it's worked for them, and you see the life-changing things that they're able to accomplish. That makes me feel great. Even when I was a police officer, I remember dealing with a young man who lived in Holiday. He had developed an opiate. He was a lacrosse player who had gotten injured at age 16, developed an opiate, addiction, and we were arresting him when he was 19. And I happened to run into him 2 years later, and he was sober. His parents had worked so hard, and we'd even worked hard as a police department because we'd stopped him and, redirected him, and he decided on treatment. And, again, I'm not sure where he is today. I'd love to hear that he was doing great today. But I ran into him at a Home Depot, believe it or not, and he said, "You remember me?" He's 21 years, he was enrolled in college, and he said, "I went to treatment and it's worked well." But to hear his story about being a student athlete in high school and having an injury and then getting addicted to opiates was just sad because there was great potential. And I was so happy that he had gone to treatment and was being successful.
We have one of our graduates who works for, who she worked for now, Clean Slate, Utah. She went on a full scholarship to the U as a swimmer, and because she wanted to keep her body slim and everything else, she started using meth.
Right.
And just got totally hooked on it and lost everything.
Yeah.
It's so available, which leads me to another question. And the cold hard facts are the people who are behind drugs, like big time people, are in it for the money, okay? And just like a Ford or any kind of somebody trying to sell a product, if there's no market for the product, they're going to go out of business.
They are. I mean,
but they all look at America as like, God, we could sell our drugs in America and people buy them all the time.
Yeah, and you talk about big companies and marketing. Some of these major drug dealers have great marketing strategies. They put it right down to the penny of how much they're paying for the product, how much the markup is, what they've got, and where their profit margins are. And we have to admit that when they have markets where maybe they don't have as many end users, they're offering, just like, hey, I'm going to give you a discount.
Right.
And that is the stories about here's a free pill, that is, an Oxycontin back when you could get those, fairly easy, and offer it up for free. And somebody then, is, as we used to say, chasing that dragon. They've had the best high of their life, and now they're chasing it. And now they've got to, again, find a supply. But Oxy's too expensive, so heroin becomes that, cheaper version. And now as a drug dealer, I've got the opportunity to have, a person that's always going to be buying. There was a young man that had left the drug treatment center. His parents had hired me to go find him. He was, out and about. He'd been out for less than 24 hours. And I was able to get a hold of his drug dealer and convinced him the better option for him was to tell me where he was. But he was thinking, I've got the guy out and I'm going to be able to sell him a lot. And I remember he was playing games, and I was, following the intel, and I got my hands on him, got him back into a detox center. But that drug dealer was disappointed because he thought, hey, I've got him out. I think he'd already sold him about $1,500 worth of drugs, and this guy had the money, and if he would have just kept him out, he was, But I gave him a consequence that he didn't want to accept. There was, again, if you don't give me this guy and give me information to find him, I'm going to give you a bigger consequence. And it worked out. But he was in it for the money. He was making money off this guy. If this guy was in treatment, he wasn't making money. If this guy was out of treatment, he was making money.
So, well, now, like oxys and stuff like that are fake. And they're adding fentanyl to them, so they have a good kick, but they're charging less for them than they used to on the street. I mean, so we're dealing with intelligent business people, I guess. I mean, they amoral business people, but
well, and in fentanyl, the scary thing about that is you can get one dose that's good, and you can get another dose that's going to cause problems. And for the end user, those tolerances that you have or you built up or you thought you built up can be dangerous. And that's where I think that we're seeing those overdoses on a higher level right now.
So what is the ultimate solution on, you're not going to eliminate the demand, I guess, I guess. So how do you eliminate the supply?
I think, and I'm not, this is somebody that has 34 years in the criminal justice system. I'm going to tell you, the education and the treatment is the solution. We can lock them away. That's not going to work. We're going to, we can move them off the street for a period of time. That's not going to work. The truth is that you have to get them those educational and treatment resources that will work for them. And not everybody, not everybody's into a 12-step program. No, not everybody's into an inpatient. But you've got to at least have enough of those tools to be able to give these individuals an opportunity to be able to change their life, to be able to make a difference. For that to click and say, I'm not going to use drugs, or I'm not going to use, what it is that I'm using, and it's going to fit, the right fit.
Should treatment be free for anyone who wants it?
According to Chris, the world,
well,
yeah, absolutely. I look at the taxpayer money that I put out every year for education, for schools, for other government programs, and I can tell you that in my mind we can reallocate to something that's going to work. I remember Sheriff Kinnard's talking about in 2005, talking about a resource center, that we're not going to take everybody to jail, that we're actually going to build a resource center. And that resource center is for drugs, alcohol, transients, mental health issues. So we're not, the solution was not to take everybody to jail. There was those group of people, a lot of people, unfortunately up here in the city would have been a target-rich environment. But we're not going to take them to jail for these offenses. We're going to take them to the resource center. And the resource center will have corrections officers there. It's going to be a secure facility. But when you get in, we're going to realize that you've got a drug treatment, or we've got a mental health issue, or we've got a homelessness issue. And we're going to push you out into those programs at the county level that can get you in there. You may not be released. In fact, if you don't do well there, we may have to take you over to the jail. But we've got two options. Sheriff Kinner talked about it, and we never pulled the trigger on it. And I can tell you that almost 20 years later, we're talking about those type of centers where you could get somebody into that center, and it's not meant that they're going to be held there. We're going to get them out to those treatment places where they need to be. If they're military and they've got PTSD, we're going to get them to that. If they're homeless or mentally ill, we're going to get them to those treatment. But a lot of times we're going to have substance abuse problems, and we're going to get them to those appropriate treatment programs that give them an opportunity to be successful. And you're right. If I'm going to spend my taxpayer money, let's spend it on that, because I know that our society will be better.
And in the long run, probably it would save a lot of money after the initial expense.
Right. It doesn't mean that we're not going to have a jail available, because there are people that aren't going to play nice on the playground, and we got to put them in there. But we have to at least have those places where we can start to kind of bifurcate where we need to put people, and those people in those groups, at least the 4, maybe 5 groups that we can identify. Those are people that we could take there and at least get them introduced into the system. That's not going to cost them money out of their pocket. That we're going to cover the cost, because we know that if they are successful, our society is going to be saving money, and we're going to be safer.
We see a lot of people who are succeeding like that in our program now.
Yeah. I think for the most part, we have to catch people at the right time when they're ready to change. But I was in the house with people that were in there because it was their option to, Odyssey House or jail. And they eventually, not all of them by any means, but some of them changed from I was doing this for court, and then I decided to change my life. And, if even that small percent does it, that's still someone doing it.
And you hear a lot about relapse and people going through 7, 10 treatment centers, right? But there's a train of thought, and I've heard it from some people who have been successful, that in each place you've gone to, you pick up a little pearl of wisdom that seems to stick in your head, even though you relapse and you go back out on the street, and finally on the 9th time it clicks.
Right. There's not one, and again, this is, according to me, is that not everybody fits the same program. I have talked to enough people that have been in treatment and successful and unsuccessful, and they talk about the things that worked for them and the things that didn't work for them. And this place is one I would never go to because it didn't help me.
Right.
But this one over here, man, I really clicked and things worked. And I agree that there's got to be, we got to have a lot of tools on our tool belt.
In your experience, when you were a cop, did people out on the street either dealing or using drugs, was the fear of arrest a deterrent at all?
I think from the cop perspective, you view that as the greatest deterrent. They're going to go to jail.
That's all you have.
Absolutely. But I think that especially when I became a sergeant, lieutenant, captain, I have to tell you, Randall, I realized that there weren't. It wasn't a deterrent. I mean, they didn't want to go to jail, but at the same time, it wasn't the biggest deterrent for them, because they knew in most cases they'd be out soon. Especially if they were a user or even a dealer, it wasn't going to last long.
The people that we have selling drugs in a place like at the street level in, say, Salt Lake, or because people see this all over the world, but the street level dealers are not getting rich, are they?
No.
And
Absolutely.
a lot of the people we have here say they dealt so they could get drugs because they couldn't afford them.
Right. No, I think when you look at major drug trafficking organizations, the person at that low level or even at the mid level are not making the money. They're not. In fact, they're getting maybe sourced out for some of their drugs, or they're making just enough to get by. because they're in between what they're doing, or they've got a side job, they're doing some other job, and this is supplementing some of their work, but they're not the person that you're popping that has $200 worth of drugs on them and some money that is sold to the undercover officer. That is not the person that's getting rich.
You may not remember this, but I remember us doing news stories on it when the sale of drugs downtown was so bad that they had people. I remember shooting a story, I can't remember which street corner it was, but they had 4 people, like one on each corner of an intersection, and one of them would make the deal, and then somebody else who wanted to go back to Honduras or wherever would actually make the delivery.
Right.
So I'd pull up to you and I'd say, I want to buy whatever. And then they'd say, okay, you pull your car over here. And then that guy was holding the drugs, and he knew that he'd probably get arrested. But what we were doing was sending them all back to their country.
Right. In some cases, I mean, if they wanted to go back, some don't want to go back, and they're going to be here. But a lot of those individuals, I mean, it's just, think about, again, at that low level, they are not making money, Randall. They're not making the millions. These drug trafficking organizations have the higher ups that are making
Tons of money.
Millions. Yes.
Okay, you work at a what do you call it now? A detective agency or an investigative?
My private investigation agency, the one my dad started in 1989, Bertram and Associates.
Bertram and Associates,
Yes.
And so it's been around for quite some time.
Has. Yeah.
Describe. I mean, you're actually doing things a lot differently than you did when you were wearing a badge.
Absolutely. And I do. I work. The majority of what I do is for attorneys, and so it may be opposition research for them in civil or criminal cases, maybe criminal defense cases, victim advocacy cases. Some is just again gathering information and intelligence for people for a variety of reasons. They want to invest with somebody, and they want to make sure it's the right person. Those are the type of cases that I'm doing. Similar to my dad, except for criminal defense. My dad wouldn't do criminal defense. I started doing that after I retired. A local attorney, Lonnie DeLand, asked me if I would do a case, and literally this person was innocent. It wasn't a case that it was an OJ innocent or maybe innocent. This gentleman was innocent, and he wasn't getting a fair shake at it. And so I worked that case, and it introduced me to what I can help do within the criminal justice system. And I like that. I believe in justice. I stole that from Perry Mason, by the way. But I believe in justice, and I think that justice is for the victims, for the families, for the state, the retribution, and for the defendants, because they deserve due process and the best.
Don't some of your old buddies say I'm pissed off at you because you're a turncoat now?
I get some comments if they're brave enough, and I appreciate the courage if they will say something to me. A lot don't, but I appreciate the ones that do, because I have the opportunity to explain that when I swore that oath as a police officer at age 22, I believed in the Constitution. I believed in our constitutional rights and our due process. But I always ask them, do you believe in justice? Absolutely, they're working on for justice. But justice involves everybody, including those people that have been arrested, and to make sure that their constitutional rights are protected. That protects you as a police officer. And if you don't understand that, you haven't been affected by it, because those that are on the other side of the criminal justice system, the anxiety, the loss, the turmoil, you want to make sure that if you're a police officer and you're doing good cases, you do good cases, because you want to arrest the right people and make sure that you scorch the earth, that there's no questions. At the same time, it's about justice. We're going to get it for the victims and their families, but we're also doing it for that defendant who has constitutional rights. And I believe in that. I believed in it for a long time when I was a police officer, and I believe in it today.
And that's your response when some of your buddies have the guts to say,
turncoat. Why are you on that side?
Yeah.
Why are you doing this? And I explained. And most of the time when I'm actually effective, Randall, there are problems with the case. Because if there are no problems with the case, if you did a great job, I'll work with the attorney to make sure that we get a good deal, that the person can move on with their life. But if there are gaps, that means that either one, the investigation was poor or missing things, and we need to fill those in.
I was telling Nicole about you before we did the podcast, and about the fact that you're a go-to guy for the media to talk about police situations where the police won't talk about the police situation. And you have not always you've offered honest opinions on how a certain incident plays out.
Right.
That doesn't, obviously you're not scared to do that, but.
Well, I'm not scared because it's these are the truths. And it's interesting when I talk to good cops, they'll tell you, God, we appreciate the fact that you just said the truth. Not every police incident is pretty or good. I mean, sometimes they're bad, and sometimes we make mistakes. And I'm willing to say that when I was a police officer, and I think that we have to acknowledge it as a society that not everything plays out perfectly. On the other hand, sometimes it does, and it doesn't look good. And we need to explain that, why it didn't look good to society, is why this may not look good, but this is exactly what we trained our officers to do, what we expect our officers to do. And yes, that didn't look good, but that's what we want. And I absolutely will be the first to say it.
And police agencies, in my experience working in the media, are not very good sometimes at explaining why they do what they do.
Right.
And it's like no comment, that kind of stuff. And the public doesn't like to hear that when there's been a shooting or a dog attacking a civilian.
Right.
And
Randall, I always say is that it's important that even if you can't talk about it or there's more investigation to be done, say that. Let's just hold our judgments for a minute. It's not going to be forever, but we just need to get some more information. And we as, critically thinking citizens have to understand that we may not have an answer in this, in this drive-through society that we have, that we get something instantly.
Right.
It may take a few days, but we're going to get an answer. We hope.
that's what I always wanted to hear when I was a reporter interviewing a cop, as opposed to no comment, just saying, this is a sensitive case, we're working on it, we're looking at that person's side, at our side, and we're going to have an answer at some point.
Right.
No,
I agree.
And the most, I remember I had a gotcha story that I knew that the cops were in the wrong. And it was about a drug dealer who had stolen some IDs or something like that, and the cops dropped the ball. And I remember asking the chief if I could do an interview, and he put one of his PIO people on it. And I thought, because I knew all this stuff that they didn't know that I knew, and so they turn on the camera, and I'm going to interview them, and I said, now tell me, and I laid it out, and the cop looked at me and he said, we screwed up. And I go, oh. And what are you going to say after that? You know? So
Nope, that is. I mean, sometimes it's not perfect.
yeah. So I remember
Your
it was
aha moment's gone.
I'm going to get you. And it's,
That's
okay.
You don't hear it often, and I mean, it doesn't. Thank goodness. Hopefully, it doesn't happen often either,
No.
Randall. But you want them to be honest. Don't run away from the cameras. Make a statement. At least, if I can't give you the answer today, I'm going to get you the answer when I can. And sometimes these are very complex. I mean, with everything that's out there, with DNA and fingerprints and photographs and video, we want to make sure. From the law enforcement side, I hope they want to make sure that they get it right.
Absolutely.
But you're right. I mean, like my dad, who made comments for 30 years to the media, I don't mind making them, come what may.
Thank you very much. Believe it or not, our half hour is up. I appreciate you coming on. It's good to see you again. What was your? You can't help but like his point of view on stuff, right?
Yeah, no.
That's
It's
why
likable, but you're like open to both sides.
Right.
So it's, yeah.
and that's why he was a great cop.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
No, thank you for having me, Randall. I appreciate the invitation. It was my pleasure.
Thank you, and thank you for watching or listening to another edition of Odyssey House Journals.